Welcome to the Writing Gym Podcast. We're here to pump up your writing. And now your host, Andy Brixey, personal trainer at the Writing Gym.
Hi, everyone. Today on the Writing Gym Podcast, we're talking about how to become a more disciplined writer. You're going to walk away with specific tips from author Russell Payne on how to build a stronger work ethic, tips for overcoming writer's block, and a truly inspirational take on how to be a writer. I'm excited to introduce you to this week's guest. But first, a word from our sponsor, Date with the Muse, where you can get help starting, finishing, and bringing to publication writing in all genres. Enter the contest to win a free hour-long coaching session with our resident writing coach. Stay tuned at the end of the podcast on how to enter. Welcome to Ripping the Writing Reps with Stephen, because he wants to tell us all about how to turn passion for writing into discipline. I'm really excited to introduce you to Stephen, but first I'd like to introduce you to our resident writing coach, the gal who helps pump up your writing into shape in the Writing Gym. Welcome back to the Writing Gym Podcast, Annalisa Parent.
Thank you, Andy. I'm so glad to be here with you.
And look, guys, I don't want to tell stories, but even if Annalisa is an amazing writing coach, she's kind of bizarre. Let me share a little something with you. She's been in 2 places at once. Now, she's not magic, but I'll let her explain.
Oh boy, I've been in 2 places at once. You're going to have to give me a little bit more of a hint on that one, Andy.
The Continental Divide.
Oh yeah, so I was in Iceland. I stood on the Continental Divide in between 2 continents, twice, 2 different places, and someday I'd like to scuba dive it.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, bucket list.
All right, guys, so check that out, and if you're listening to the podcast, be sure to check out all this crazy stuff in the show notes. And today, we are welcoming the fabulous author Russell Payne to the Writing Gym. Stephen is a renowned Vermont author who has written the wonderful novel Cliff Walking, Riding My Guitar, the Rick Norcross story, as well as many fiction and nonfiction short stories, and is now releasing a beautiful collection of Vermont short stories called Ties That Bind Us. We are so excited to have Stephen here to talk to us about his writing process and how his life as a police officer, a surgeon, and a Vermonter have led and inspired him to become the author he is today. Thank you so much for joining us, Stephen.
Well, thanks for having me. After hearing Annalisa talk about being on the Continental Divide, I'm actually sitting next to our wood stove. I have a copper car.
That's great. So, Stephen, I'm really interested, I've talked to you before, and I love talking to you about your writing. You're so passionate about what you do. So tell us a little bit about where your passion for writing comes from.
Well, I grew up in the Northeast Kingdom in St. Johnsbury and part-time in Irisburg, where my parents had a farm. And I really got the bug to start writing around 6th or 7th grade. One day we were in English class, and I wasn't really the best behaved student, shall we say. And Jimmy Parks and I were shooting spitballs at each other across the back of the room, and Mr. Hubbard, my 6th grade teacher, took us out in the hallway and gave us a choice. I could either write a short book, or I could go to detention every day for a week. And I thought, this is a no-brainer. Of course, I'll write the book, which I'd never really done before. And I ended up writing this little book called Skybound, which was about paratroopers that my dad knew in World War II over Europe. And I illustrated it and I brought it in. And he didn't believe I'd written it. He was like, there's no way, you wrote this. And I said, well, do I have to get my mother to sign something about this? So I must say I really got the bug about writing immediately and worked on that little story. And the next year in 7th grade, Louise Swainbank, our English teacher, told us one day that she was going to have a real poet come into our class the next day. And honestly, we didn't even know what a real poet was. And they got us in the little assembly hall, and this kind of nervous fellow smoking a cigarette, if you can imagine that in junior high now, kind of slightly disheveled, dark hair, comes into the room and introduces himself as Galway Cannell. And at that point, I didn't really know who Galway Cannell was. This was in 1967. He hadn't been in Vermont that long. And I remember him reading some poems, but what I remember most was him talking about what it felt like to be a writer, that he had this internal drive, this internal passion that was really uncontrollable. If he wasn't writing, he just didn't feel right, sort of thing. And like, was really a budding national figure at that time. And even though I'd only written that one thing and a few poems maybe, I just remember sitting there like completely understanding what he was talking about. Yeah. Most of my friends were totally bored, talking about the Red Sox, trying to get into the playoffs. And I actually was telling my friends to be quiet because I wanted to listen to this guy. And I became a real admirer of Galway Cannell, and went on to college at Tufts University, where I studied with X.J. Kennedy and Denise Levertov, and Robert Lowell was around, and all these contemporaries of Galway Cannell, and the fire was lit. And really, it's never gone out. I've written my entire life. When I was in medical school and surgery training, I must say it was a little difficult to find time to write, but I was really blessed that my chief of surgery when I trained at UVM was Dr. John Davis, who was the person that Trapper John was based on in the book and movie MASH. And
oh, what? That's so cool.
Yeah, very, very cool guy. And he was a renowned surgical writer. He was editor of the Journal of Trauma, and he knew that I liked to write. And all through my surgery residency, asked me to bring him stories. We'd talk in his office about different short stories, and I really think he was instrumental in keeping the writing going during the rigors of surgery training, which is pretty brutal. So even during that time, I kept writing and didn't really start publishing stories until I was in practice, like in the late 80s, I think, something like that. And that was when I met Howard Mosier, who I loved as a writer. And actually, I dedicate my new book, Ties That Bind Us, to Howard. And he, as I said in the little dedication, he's probably the most generous human being I've ever met. He has helped so many writers, whether he knows them or whether he doesn't. In fact, I was having a hard time getting going on a story in 1987 or 8, I don't remember now. And just on a Friday night, I thought, well, I'll look in the phone book in Irishburg and see if Howard's listed. And he was listed, and I called up and I got his wonderful wife, Phyllis. And, I kind of blathered out who I was, and I would love to talk to him. And Phyllis, without skipping a beat, said, "No problem, I'll have him call you back at 9.
Wow.
And the phone rang a little after 9, and we probably talked and laughed for about an hour on the phone the first time we ever talked. We both really, really like Northeast Kingdom or Northern Vermont stories. So Howard has become a dear friend over 20 plus years now, and also has been a great mentor to me. He's read most of the stories that I've written over the years. In fact, really was the one that pushed me to put this collection together. He badgered me for several years, and he threatened me. I forget how he threatened me, but I finally paid attention and put the story collection together. So really, writing's been a part of my daily life for a long, long time. And unless I'm up all night operating or something and I'm too tired to do anything, really every morning and every night, I'm working on something, writing, editing, corresponding with readers, doing this sort of thing. So it's part of me.
That's great, and you've got a great writing discipline.
Is that when you find time for writing in the early morning? Because for our subscribers, you mentioned going through surgical training and stuff. Your Annalisa talks a lot about having a job that pays the bills and things. I mean, your job is clearly very important, being a surgeon. Do you find time for writing in the morning before you go into work and in the evenings when you get home? Like, when is your, some authors talk about waking up at 4 a.m. to get in 3 hours of writing before they go to their, paying the bills job. How do you fit that into your life?
Well, the way it really works for me is I have a story going in my head and on the keyboard pretty much all the time. I'm working on a short story, and I'm working on a second draft of a new novel at the moment, and I'm thinking about those characters. And as you know, as a writer, once you really kind of get characters off the ground, I really feel like I'm watching them and writing down what they're doing more than actually creating it. So I think the key for me is thinking about a story all the time. I mean, I don't mean in the middle of surgery, but, generally speaking, when I'm riding around, my kids always joke with me that I used to, when they were little, I used to have them write on yellow stickies in my truck because, I couldn't write and drive, at least with the kids in the car. And they still joke with me about I had so many yellow stickies on the dashboard, like you could barely see the speedometer. I mean, I just, when I'm driving around, that's a time, or when I'm working in the woods, that I do a lot of thinking about stories. And it's interesting, a lot of my friends are very frenetic about their writing. They're in lots of writing groups, and I joke with them that they never have a thought that they don't run by their readers. And I'm really different. I subscribe to the Stephen King school of writing. King wrote a great book called On Writing, which everybody's read. And he really believes in keeping the study door closed while you're writing until you have a decent first draft. And he's very, very strict about that. And I'm the same way. And my feeling is that there's a certain amount of creative energy that we have. And if I leech off any of that creative energy, like telling somebody about what I'm writing about, even my wife, who's a great first reader, she's great. She doesn't want to hear anything about anything, even if I'm all wound up and I want to tell her something. She won't. She just walks away. Because I really got to put all of that energy into the story. It can't go anywhere else until at least I get a draft done. So with that background, my discipline really is not that I force myself to write, but that honestly, it's a habit. It's like doing exercises or meditating in the morning or eating or whatever. Every morning, unless I got to go to the OR early. I mean, some days I can't do anything, but generally speaking, I kind of wake up thinking about problems I'm trying to work through in a story or a new story, and I work on that before I go to work. If I have a lunch hour, I often come home. I live pretty close to the hospital, and I'll do some more work at lunch. And then my rule generally is I don't watch any TV until I've done at least an hour of work, like after dinner. And I'm pretty good about that. Sometimes, like if Scandal is on, maybe. So the discipline for me, I gave it really kind of a cool talk to the American College of Surgeons annual meeting a couple of years ago, and this topic came up, and a lot of my colleagues from around Vermont or the Northeast were asking about, how do you find time to write? And my response to that is that I'm really as passionate about writing as I am everything else in my life. I mean, I would no more not keep writing than I would not show up to the operating room. that's the way I feel about it. The schedule changes day to day, but writing is that important to me. And just like Galway Canal talked about, we were just on a family trip out to the Grand Canyon, which was amazing. None of us had ever been there before. And even at the Grand Canyon, I hadn't ridden for a few days because we'd been on the road driving like hours and hours and hours. And, one day I kind of stayed back and worked on the novel that I'm writing at the moment, and in part because I could just feel that weirdness coming on when I'm not writing regularly. I run, and they'll tell you if they don't run for a few days, like you don't want to be around them. I'm not that bad, but writing is central.
I really love that. And I love the idea, Stephen, that the writing habit is like a job, that you wouldn't any less not show up for the writing than you would for your real job. And I think that getting not only into that discipline, but into that passion is such an important part of coming to that writing table every single day.
I couldn't agree more. At almost every book event I do, I actually had the launch event for this new short story collection just a week or two ago. And as is always the case, I had two people come up to me, and they started out with people I'd never seen before. I've always wanted to write a novel.
Yeah.
And how do you do it? And I always kind of respond the same way to you folks. And often, if they really aren't passionate about writing, their face kind of glazes over and they go, oh, you write every day? And yes. And it's interesting because I think so many people, have that romantic thought of they're going to write a book someday, which is great. But my experience has been out on the road the last 5 years, maybe 1 or 2 out of 100, I see that spark in their eye that I know from my own experience has got to be there. And it's really cool when I connect with somebody, particularly a young person, who really seems to have that spark and like they want to send you something to read, and they follow up, and I think that's wonderful. And the other people, I try to be really supportive of them, but like all of us that write, we know what it takes to finish a book. And it's, Betty Davis said, getting old ain't for sissies. Well, writing a book ain't for sissies either.
Amen.
Okay, you can talk now.
I'm just, everything you're saying is so wonderfully fascinating. I really like the idea of the spark that you see in those people that you meet on the road. Do you think that that's something that everybody kind of has? Maybe if you kind of dig it out of them. Like Annalisa is a fantastic writing coach, so I know that myself. Like I'm not as disciplined as you, Stephen, by any manner. I do not write nearly as much as I should, but I have these ideas, and I get that little bit of a spark, but I feel like sometimes it just takes a little bit extra to ignite it. Do you think that
a nudge or something?
Yeah, just like a little push. Do you think that that spark is kind of in everybody, and that like with enough of a nudge and maybe a good writing coach or mentor, or an environment like the writing gym where they could talk to each other and get the support that they need, that they could stop being a sissy and write their book?
Well, yeah, I might not go that far. I don't know if everybody has the spark. I think there's creative potential in everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people really benefit if they can't find, their groove and their muse and their discipline. I think that what Annalisa does is fantastic. It's such a boost for people who like just can't get their act together. And I know really talented, creative people. One is in film and one is an actor and a couple of writers, and they struggle just to get the pen down onto the page. And I forget, I don't remember who it was that said this, but writing seriously is 2% inspiration and 98% perspiration. Might have been Stephen King. I don't know who said it.
I think that was originally Edison in a very different context.
Oh, maybe it was Edison. Yeah. I've heard it so many times, I can't remember where it came from. But I think that's really true. And people have all kinds of great ideas about things they're going to invent, or a movie they're going to make, or a book they're going to write. But knowing a lot of writers now over the years, the ones that I see at book events or I share a book event with are the ones that in one form or another are doing the same thing I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. Most of their free time, they're not out in pubs drinking, and they're not watching As the World Turns. I'm dating myself now. They're working on a manuscript of some kind. And I think the availability of writing coaches, which is maybe not new, but it seems like the last 10 years or so is when I've really heard about them. If somebody is serious, but they haven't had the exposure, which I was really lucky to have. I had some tremendous professors, at really good schools that made you work very hard. And they took it really seriously, and I think that helped me take it seriously. Some people will say to me, a person said the other day at this event, well, don't you have any fun? You sound so serious about your writing. And the truth is that I have a little bit of fun when I'm writing. I mean, a lot of the material I write is pretty serious material. And when I really hit a groove and a sentence or a paragraph or a scene is just cooking, like I can't type it out fast enough, that's fun.
Yeah.
But most of the time, I don't really get my kicks out of writing, because I'm kind of having a great time and laughing and hooting and hollering it up. I get the good feeling because it does something for me. It satisfies like this important primal need that I have to create. I did an interview in New Hampshire, a live interview at this place called the Theater in the Woods. It was like this wonderful Cold River radio show. It's kind of like a Prairie Home Companion done over near North Conway. Mm-hmm. And they have like 300 people there, and there's musicians. I mean, it was just fabulous. And they basically asked me, well, what would you do if you couldn't write? And my off-the-cuff answer would be, well, it would be similar to you saying, well, what would you do if you couldn't breathe?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's really that ingrained. So it's a blast when a book comes out, but it's mostly hard work in the interim when you're working on something new.
Thank you, Annalisa, for more of your great writing advice. Annalisa is the resident writing coach in the Writing Gym. She helps writers start, finish, and bring to publication writing in all genres. And in my opinion, she's the best at what she does. Also, if you love the Writing Gym podcast, we'd love to have you join us in the Writing Gym. You're going to love breaking a literary sweat in the Writing Gym. Get a workout to improve your writing no matter what genre you're working on. We even have a personal trainer, me, to help keep you accountable to your writing goals. I won't make you run laps, but I will make sure your pages are done. To see what we're up to this week, go to writing-gym.com. Don't forget the dash. Thank you for joining us to pump up your writing here on the Writing Gym podcast. Make sure and leave us a fantastic rating if you enjoyed the podcast, and leave us a line in the comments section if you found Stephen as amazing as we did. Your 5-star rating will help other writers find this fastest growing podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes and download all of the takeaways and this week's freebie on how to turn your real-life experiences into publishing success at www.writing-gym.com/weekly-writing-reps. And speaking of freebies, don't forget to enter our contest at www.writing-gym.com/contest to win a free writing coaching session with Annalisa herself. The secret code this week is Toni Morrison. Happy writing!
This has been the Writing Gym Podcast with Andy Brixey and Annalisa Parent. To join the Writing Gym, visit www.writing-gym.com.